What is not a bullet you dodged, but a huge tactical nuke you dodged? Broke my belly button over eating at a company lunch. Went from an innie to an outie hernia. Put off going to the doctor for a few weeks before going to see a specialist. Hernia doc said, yep, it's a hernia. We're in a pandemic, we can schedule you for whenever. If you want to wait a bit, there shouldn't be any problems, no hurry. I decided to get it out of the way. They had a cancellation, so I scheduled for a week later. I wake up from surgery and the doc says there was a complication. They didn't get to the hernia. When they were going in, they noticed my appendix was about to explode, so they took that out instead. Still not the tactical nuke. I asked about when they could fix the hernia. He said the appendix looked funny and was going to send it to the lab and get back to me. The lab was really backed up from the pandemic, so several weeks later I get a call from the doc. It was a really rare appendix cancer, something that happens to around 1,000 Americans a year. Not only that, but of the two kinds of appendix cancer based on lab work, I had the worst of the two. The kind that spreads everywhere really fast and cuts your lifespan down considerably even with treatment. The first kind grows slow and stays put, but every once in a while it will go into overdrive, differentiates, pokes out of the abdominal wall and spits cancer slime everywhere that turns whatever it touches into more cancer. The cutoff for it turning from good into the bad kind is 1 centimeter tumor. Mine has 1.5 centimeters. Under the microscope it had differentiated and they saw the cells that spit cancer slime had formed. There's really only one treatment referred to as the mother of all surgeries, which is its own ball of tactical nukes. I stew over that for a few weeks till they can get more tests scheduled. Still in pandemic, so it takes a while. Go in for a barrage of scans, pokings and proddings, and the scans are all clean, no signs of cancer spread mostly. It had just turned from the slow-growing kind that stays put into the fast-moving kind and hadn't had a chance to spit cancer slime outside the wall holding my appendix if I had waited just a week for the hernia surgery. Literally every day that I waited would have exponentially increased the odds of it spreading the mucin. They think they got it all when they took the appendix out. There's a few things they want to keep an eye on that they're reasonably sure is just scarring from the surgery, but they gave me an 80% chance of being cancer-free. I have more scans in December to make sure. Update Deck 30. My scans in December came back great. The thing they were keeping an eye on got smaller, not bigger, which is what they would expect if it was scar tissue from the surgery and not a tumor. Although not completely out of the woods, they're still going to do routine scans for the next 5 to 6 years. Pretty much every scan is expected to improve my odds. I get to do the hernia surgery in 3 months. My oncologist will be there to take a look in case the surgeon sees anything weird while he's in there. Story 2. After a night of partying, a bunch of us wanted to go watch the sun come up at a local beach. When we had just graduated HS, there wasn't a sober one amongst us, and one guy volunteered to drive in his minivan. A few of us said no, let's watch it from the deck, but he said he was sober enough. I just had a bad feeling and a bunch of us stayed back and slept it off at the house. We were all woken up a few hours later about 8 o'clock to phone ringing off the hook, cops, and freaking out parents. Pre-cell phone days. They were in a really bad single-car rollover accident. 4 of 6 dead. No one wearing seatbelts. They would have had to have taken a curve at about 160 kilometers per hour. That was a rough summer, and survivor's guilt and depression is a real thing. Story 3. Around the time I turned 30, 2010, I lost a large amount of weight. While I'd previously always looked my age or older, I suddenly looked to be about 5 to 10 years younger than I actually was. I started hanging out in Allston, an area of Boston known for its nightlife, often with people in their early to mid-20s. There was a guy who also hung out down there who really stood out. I never saw him in the bars, just walking down Brighton Avenue or North Beacon Street, usually carrying a gym bag, always alone. Unlike most understated Bostonians, he dressed in a very Eurotrash sort of way. He had a light olive complexion with smooth skin and dark hair, which he wore slicked back. What I remember most vividly is that every time I saw him he was wearing reflective aviator sunglasses, so I never got a look at his eyes. I thought of him as Aviator Dude. Enjoying my new confidence, I decided to try to befriend Aviator Dude. The first few times I tried to make eye contact, I got exactly zero response, no acknowledgement whatsoever. I suspected he was unfriendly and not interested, but maybe he just didn't see me. I wasn't done trying yet. Finally, one day in early autumn 2010, Aviator Dude and I stood across the street from each other, waiting for a light to change so we could each cross. I decided that this was my chance. As the light changed to the walk signal, I made direct eye contact with him. I gave him a flirty smile, and then I winked at him. I immediately regretted this decision. Aviator Dude stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropped a little bit, then his lips hardened into a sneer. I didn't need to see past the aviators to know that his face had twisted with disgust. More than a bit taken aback, I kept walking past him. I looked back at him briefly. Aviator Dude was still standing there, in the middle of the intersection of North Beacon and Cambridge Streets, staring at me with a disgusted look on his face. He shook his head, wrung his hands, and walked on, muttering under his breath. Well, okay then, about 5 years later, I saw Aviator Dude again, but not in person. In 2015, I was watching the trial of the Boston Marathon bomber, Jokart Sarnaev, online via Twitter, and the news updated in real time. Some of the evidence presented included photographs of Tamerlan Sarnaev, the older brother who was killed in a shootout with police. I immediately recognized him. Tamerlan Sarnaev was Aviator Dude. Not only was he a radicalized murderer responsible for the worst terrorist attack in Massachusetts history, one of the points brought up repeatedly by the surviving marathon bombing suspect's defense lawyers was that Tamerlan was abusive to those weaker than him, including and especially the women in his life. A domestic violence charge regarding an ex-girlfriend held up his U.S. citizenship application, and his widow's college friends testified that they heard him getting verbally abusive and throwing furniture at her. It has been speculated that the man may also have been responsible for a triple homicide in suburban Waltham in September of 2011, about a year after the events described above. I'm really glad he rejected me. Story 4. I was engaged to someone, but then came to my senses and broke it off. 9 months later, I found out she got married to someone else. Then about 1 year after that, she killed her husband. Story 5. 24 years old. Had a pesky sore on my tongue that was really bothering me. My boyfriend's dad was a dentist, so when I was over at his house one night I asked him to take a look. He recommended I go see an oral surgeon the next day for him to check it out. The next day I decided it was feeling better, so I tried to cancel my act, but my boyfriend's dad insisted I go. I went, and the oral surgeon pretty much diagnosed it as cancer on the spot. It was aggressive and, by the time of my surgery to remove it, it had already spread to multiple lymph nodes. They ended up removing over half my tongue, followed by chemo and radiation. Given how aggressive it was, I often think that if I had put off the doctor's visit any longer, I probably wouldn't have survived. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary in January. On a road trip in college with 4 friends. We stopped halfway for a pit stop because I had explosive diarrhea and was getting more sick by the minute. Friends carried on to Vegas and left me with one of the guys who rented us a car to return home. The friends that carried on got into a rollover. 1 died, 2 will be injured for life. Story 7. My wife and I were prepared to buy a nice riverfront property in 2019, but the owners, her dad and uncle, were dragging their feet. We had our down payment. We were approved for the mortgage, and we had even been living there paying rent. Then the river rose 30 feet, 10 meters, and we had to evacuate. The water kept rising. The house was destroyed before we bought it, so we didn't buy it. Story 8. In uni, me and my 2 best friends were drinking, playing Mario Kart, and just shooting the **T. We were hungry and wanted food. I said, let's just make a tombstone pizza because we've been drinking and most delivery services were closed at 1:30 a.m. One said he's fine to drive. I said no bad idea. He got the other guy to go with. McDonald's usually doesn't take 2 hours to get, so eventually I went for a scooter ride since McDonald's was less than 2 miles away. I noticed there's a taped off spot on the bridge right before McDonald's with a crane, cops and an ambulance. They curbed the car and drove it off the bridge and into the shallow creek top first and died on impact. I dodged the nuke of death, but ate the bullet of survivor's guilt for nearly 5 years. Story 9. When I was 16, I had a good friend whose father was a wealthy businessman of some kind. This is Chicago, and I guess his dad started screwing around with the wrong guy's woman. My friend told me it had something to do with the mob or a mobster's wife. I never knew for sure, but do know that I saw firsthand his dad get threatened at a tennis court of all places by two well-dressed, clearly Italian men who drove up in a black Cadillac. I was sitting right there with his friend as they talked to him, and it was exactly as I imagined it would be in the movies. My friend said there was a contract on his dad. He actually said it like it was cool, and at the time, I guess I thought it was too. I was invited to go with them on a fishing trip in Lake Michigan that week. My friend, his dad, his dad's friend, and I. 2 days before the fishing trip, something happened with a member of my family and we had to go to Cincinnati for a few days. When I returned, I learned my friend's body was found floating in Lake Michigan. He was wearing a life vest. His father, his father's friend, and the boat were never found. Police questioned me about what I knew and who I'd seen talking to his dad, but I think I was lucky that I said I couldn't describe what they looked like and didn't get wildly specific. Either way, the coolest kid I knew, Chris, was dead. And they never found his dad, the dad's friend, or the boat. It was a nice boat on a calm day on Lake Michigan, and something bad happened. Always felt I dodged getting caught up in something I wouldn't have escaped from. Story 10. My father-in-law was working on construction of a power plant and was scheduled work Sunday, was a union pipe fitter. Saturday, he got a call from another company asking him to run a job much closer to his house. Think 5-minute commute versus 50. So he accepted and didn't go to the power plant job Sunday. That day there was an explosion at the plant and people in the crew he was working with wound up getting killed.